Hi, I'm Sean Paul, Project Management Trainer at PM World Education. Today we will focus on the task, Manage Conflict. It's a critical interpersonal skill for project managers. If you have been involved in projects, you already know that conflict is inevitable in a project environment. It's even healthy because it sparks creativity. Successful conflict management results in greater productivity and positive working relationships. When managed properly, differences of opinion can lead to increased creativity and better decision-making. On the flip side, if conflict is not effectively dealt with, it can not only block progress, but it can also lead to personal stress. Now let's dive into a commonly accepted process and a recognized model for conflict resolution that all project managers and team members can use. Conflict is a perception, meaning it only really exists if it is acknowledged by the parties that are experiencing it. If two team members have a heated discussion, but they walk away from the disagreement unfazed and either don't think about the issue again, or think the issue is resolved, then no conflict exists. If the parties walk away feeling that their ideas were not heard, or that the party was wrong, or that the conflict is impeding progress, well then conflict exists. It's important for us to think before we act. This means not jumping in too quickly to resolve conflicts in the project. On the other hand, perhaps team members are happy resolving conflicts among themselves, so we should let them. Another point to think about is that if you can assist or if they have actually asked for support, then we should be facilitating. So, what are the enablers for good conflict management? First, we observe and interpret where the conflict is coming from and from what stage it is at. This requires us to have good perception and to observe verbal and non-verbal signs. So, where does conflict come from? What's the source? In projects, common sources for conflict include scarce resources, scheduling priorities, cultural differences, personal work styles, and other factors. As part of gathering the facts, you would meet with each separately to discuss their concerns, and there are even times when you might need to speak with third parties, in order to gather facts and data for the analysis. Just hearing their own likely biased sides of the story is not enough for investigating the conflict. Understanding the causes of conflict can also mean doing some root cause analysis. Understanding the underlying cause of the conflict is important, because otherwise the conflict will resurface even after resolved. Keep in mind that your focus is on resolving the causes of the conflict in the context, not the broader project issues. We will explore the stages of conflict in just a bit. Second, analyze the context for the conflict, which means looking at the various aspects and dimensions of the conflict. Then, one can assess what the best conflict resolution approach might be. Some proving questions might be the importance and intensity of the conflict, the time pressure for resolving the conflict, the relative power of the people involved in the conflict, and the motivation to resolve the conflict on a long-term or short-term basis. Third, based on the analysis, determine the best conflict resolution approach based on the situation. We'll take a closer look at the conflict resolution path now. When we think of stages of conflict, there is no standard list. However, these are commonly recognized in the industry. You're not likely to be tested on the terms, but it is helpful to know in order to understand conflict management in a deeper way. Latent conflict is the stage in which factors exist in the situation that could become potential conflict. Types of latent conflict are competition for scarce resources, drive for autonomy, divergence of goals, and roles conflict. Perceived conflict is where conflicts may sometimes arise even if no conditions of latent conflict exist. This is the stage where one party perceives the other to be likely to frustrate his or her goals or to impede them. The case in which conflict is perceived when no latent conflict arises is said to result from parties misunderstanding each other's true position. Such conflict can be resolved by improving communications between the two groups. Felt conflict. Felt conflict is the stage when the conflict is not only perceived, but actually felt and recognized. The personalization of conflict is the mechanism which causes many people to be concerned with dysfunctions of conflict. In other words, it makes them really feel the conflict. Manifest conflict is the stage when two parties engage in behaviors which evoke responses from each other. The most obvious of these responses are open aggression, apathy, sabotage, withdrawal, and perfect obedience to rules. Except for prison riots, political revolutions, and extreme labor unrest, violence as a form of manifest conflict is rare. Conflict resolution has been added to this model as an additional box, even though the common model doesn't include it. In the figure, it's to emphasize that conflict aftermath is a direct function of the results of the conflict. Conflict aftermath. The aftermath of a conflict may have positive or negative repercussions for the organization, depending on how the conflict is resolved. If the conflict is genuinely resolved to the satisfaction of all parties, the basis for more cooperative relationship might be laid. Or, participants in their drive for a more ordered relationship may focus on latent conflicts not previously perceived and dealt with. On the other hand, if conflict is merely suppressed and not resolved, the latent conditions of conflict may be aggravated and explode in a much more serious form, until they are rectified. This conflict stage is called conflict aftermath. The success of project managers in managing their project teams often depends on their ability to resolve conflict. Different project managers may use different conflict resolution methods. There are 5 general techniques for resolving conflict. Each technique has its own place and use. The choice of an appropriate conflict resolution mode depends to a great extent on the situation and the goals of the party. According to this model you see here, each party must decide to the extent they are interested in satisfying their own concerns, called assertiveness, and the extent to which they are interested in helping satisfy the opponent's concerns, called cooperativeness. Avoiding or withdrawing conflict is essentially retreating from a potential or actual conflict situation. This feels a lot like postponing the issue or removing yourself from the situation. It's generally considered a lose-lose. Accommodating or smoothing focuses on areas of agreement rather than areas of difference, conceding one's position to the needs of others to maintain harmony or relationships. This is basically giving in. You may sometimes decide to pick your battles, however this method does not result in resolved conflict for the long term. It's often just a short-term step. Compromising or reconciling is a common approach, but one that is often misunderstood. Compromising is about searching for situations that bring some degree of satisfaction to all parties involved, to temporarily or partially resolve the conflict. This approach occasionally results in lose-lose situations. Competing or forcing method is where one party pushes their viewpoint at the expense of others, offering only win-lose situations. It's usually enforced through a power position to resolve an emergency. The approach, once again, is a win-lose situation most commonly. Might someone use it? Sure, but it will not result in a win-win outcome. And that leaves us with collaborating or problem solving. This method is the most beneficial method that can result in both a win-win outcome and a long-term resolution. Collaborating involves incorporating multiple viewpoints and insights from differing perspectives. Collaborating, of course, requires a cooperative attitude and open dialogue that typically can lead to consensus and commitment. While the interests of the parties are important, as a project manager, you always want to keep the project objectives in sight. Sometimes, stakeholders involved in conflict are driven by emotion, and as a project manager, you need to also keep the big picture in mind. The last orange story is one that is used in most conflict management and negotiations training programs to illustrate compromising versus collaboration conflict management. 2 kids come running up to the dad in a panic. "Dad, this is the last orange in the fridge, and I need it," the older one starts. "No, I need it," the younger one responds, predictably. Before the older one can start the never-ending debate about who needs the orange more, Dad gets a knife, splits the orange in half, and have them share it. Problem solved? Wrong. They both take their half of the orange and run away crying to their rooms. You see, as it turns out, the older kid was baking a cake, and the recipe called specifically for the peel of an orange. When they got their half the orange peel, they realized the cake would be ruined. The younger kid, on the other hand, was just thirsty and wanted the orange to make orange juice. You can see, there was never really a conflict here. We had one orange peel, and we had one orange fruit. Both could have had their needs met fully. When conflict emerges, we sometimes try to rush to solutions based on only the information presented to us. Whether it's a conflict at home, conflict at the office, or even conflict internationally, we keep our discussion at the level of what is the best solution, without taking time to ask questions about what the problem really is. So here's the lesson. Ask questions. If people are unhappy about a particular situation, ask them why. What is it about the current situation that does not work? Get past their immediate answer to the problem, their position, and get at the underlying source of the problem, their interests. Turning this into a project scenario, the conflict could be over limited resources, limited schedules, or even contract negotiations. It will naturally take a bit more time, but the added time of getting to the root cause makes problem solving and conflict resolution much easier. Conflict management is useful when trying to create alignment between stakeholders or when conflict arises between team members. At project initiation, the project manager is often facilitating conversations with stakeholders as part of the development of the project charter. Given that stakeholders often have different agendas or objectives, they may not all agree with the project objective. Conflict management skills can come to the rescue in assisting in aligning stakeholders. Conflict should be addressed early and often in private, using a direct, collaborative approach. This means usually speaking to each party separately, but taking care that you don't only listen to their often biased sides of the story. You need to have also gathered and analyzed facts as part of the process. The parties to the conflict should be involved in conflict resolution. Of course, once you're working with the team, conflict resolution skills will be important in order to resolve conflicts in a timely manner, and especially in a constructive way. If the difference becomes negative, the team members are initially responsible for their resolution between themselves on their own. If the conflict then escalates, the project manager should be then helping facilitate a satisfactory resolution. A team charter, or ground rules, are useful in order to establish the conflict management approach and protocol to be used among internal and external team members. Remember that the team's social contract, its team charter, is how team members interact with each other. The goal of the team charter is to create an environment in which team members can work to the best of their ability as a team.